understand we're only halfway into the year and there are plenty of more films to come, but Osgood Perkins' adaptation of Stephen King's supernatural short story The Monkey is still holding strong as my favourite film of 2025 thus far. It is a macabre gallows comedy that genuinely had me laughing out loud at its clever wit, sardonic apathetic tone, campy absurdist gore, and surprisingly thoughtful tale about dealing with death.
It is what it is. The word of the Lord.
It tells a story of an estranged father called Hal, who suffers from debilitating childhood trauma when he and his twin brother Bill inherited a wind-up toy monkey from their absent father that, every time it bangs on its drum, causes the death of a random person typically close by. However, 25 years later, after seemingly ridding themselves of the monkey, lo and behold, it returns out of nowhere and causes chaos once again, prompting Hal to reluctantly hunt it down while trying to spend his final week of custody with his understandably resentful son, Petey.
Hurry up, I'm going to bed. We're gonna make like eggs and scramble!
At times, it's like I'm watching a horror movie as if it were directed by Wes Anderson. It's quirky, eccentric, brilliantly pieced together, confident in its visual style, and has so many wonderful callbacks, references, and foreshadowing that make it super rewatchable. Now, that said, watching all these gruesome, gory horror movies, as endlessly enjoyable as they are, often leave me feeling gross and dirty, and what better way to wash it off than with rice water protein shampoo and conditioner by this video's sponsor, Kitsch. It might be hard to believe, but my fragile male ego is rather protective of my hair, or what potentially one day might be left of it. So when I learned Kitsch's rice water shampoo and conditioner bars repaired damaged hair follicles, prevented split ends, and promoted a healthier scalp, hair length, and density, there was no way I could refuse. I was skeptical at first, but seeing that my fiance uses half a dozen different shampoo and conditioner bottles for her own hair maintenance and repair, I thought I would be a hero by finding an efficient, higher value, eco-friendly alternative that we could both use. I just assumed it was normal for my hair to be dry and dull, but Kitsch's shampoo and conditioner bars showed me the power of smooth, refreshing hair by helping me achieve a confident, natural sit and texture, so I didn't even have to do any restyling to look presentable. These stylish, wonderful smelling bars make up the equivalent of 2 bottles of liquid shampoo and conditioner, reducing single-use plastic, and along with Kitsch body wash and their self-draining soap dish, I felt I got way more value for less, including the price. Use my code or link to get 25% off site-wide, including the shampoo and conditioner combo for less than $25. And if Kitsch's range of hair and skincare catches your eye, a Kitsch subscription will bag you an even better deal. So while you're out there beautifying and looking your very best, let's get back to talking about The Monkey. While The Monkey is technically a horror movie, it's not a tense nor scary one, and writer-director Oz Perkins, coming fresh off his morbidly brooding Longlegs, is very clear in that intention. I mean, if you open a movie with a mustache-wearing Adam Scott trying to pawn off a grinning monkey only for it to cause a harpoon gun to go off and gut the owner before Scott manically tries to destroy it with a flamethrower, then you know what you're getting into. Despite only ever having made horror films, Perkins has frequently stated he's not an especially huge fan of the genre, but finds great fascination in using it as a relatable lens to tell human stories. I've already covered his first 3 films, and yes, I do intend to cover Longlegs very soon, so I'll not linger too much on Perkins himself, but it is important to understand his background to get the context behind this specific adaptation. In multiple interviews, Perkins has always seen his work as a reflection on his personal life, particularly regarding his family, having lost both his parents in tragic circumstances a decade apart. He lost his father to AIDS in 1992 and his mother in 9/11, so to him, a story about living with death and the inconceivable chaos of life brings him a form of catharsis, echoing my own view that many people find comfort and validation in the relatable circumstances of horror. All of his stories inherently deal with grief and family tragedy in some way or another, such as his most personal film, I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House, which pays tribute to Perkins' father and his desire to reconnect with him under the guise of a classical ghost story about the presence we leave behind after we're gone. Specifically though, Perkins' main takeaway from King's version of The Monkey was the focus on generational trauma and the sometimes indirect burdens loaded downloaded onto us by our parents, which in turn Perkins fears potentially passing on to his children. Perkins explained to Diaz Digital that one of the drivers for the story was knowing his parents held secrets in order to protect him and his brother Elvis during their upbringing, such as their father's affair as a closeted homosexual and his later AIDS diagnosis. This is directly inferred to in the film's setup, where Hal is intentionally estranged from his son Petey to protect him from what Hal refers to as his emotional baggage, symbolized via the monkey, fearing that being close to his family could lead to another vicious cycle of cursed chaos.
I don't know if every father passes some secret horror on to his kids, but mine sure did.
In a more generalized way, he basically isolates himself from everyone and lives an unfulfilling life because he's weighed down by the intense trauma of his past. And when you dig deeper, it all began when his father abandoned Hal and his family not long after coming in possession of the monkey. The monkey is undoubtedly a symbol for the carnage the characters face in their lives. It's their father's abandonment that first triggers the domino effect of the brothers discovering the monkey and essentially inheriting the problem their father chose to run away from. It's implied their father left for the same reasons Hal later justifies being estranged from his family, but his older brother Bill and their mother Lois don't come to understand this, thus it's the catalyst that tears the family apart. Now, we will get into the more overt theme of death in just a moment, but the point that bookends the story is this theme of ownership and responsibility, particularly for one's own emotions, behaviors, and responses, and the impact it has on both yourself and everyone around you. Major spoilers here, but the key event that causes the traumatic rift between the brothers is the death of their mother, where a young Hal winds the monkey and wishes for it to kill his brother for all the bullying and torment, only for it to target their mother instead, leaving Bill deeply traumatized after he witnesses her violently die from what the film calls a boomerang aneurysm. The thing is, Hal and Bill share the same trauma, but they act on it differently. The duality between them is that they now both lead lonely, repressed lives, where Hal chooses to run away from his problems and causes the only people that matter in his life to grow increasingly bitter towards him, whereas Bill chooses to blame his problems, specifically the death of his mother, on Hal, and causes tremendous chaos while trying to exact revenge with the monkey. It isn't until the end do both brothers finally accept that their pain is the result of something that's simply outside either of their control. It's what they do with that pain that ultimately defines them. As an older Hal coldly narrates following his mother's death, a boomerang aneurysm happens to 1 in a million people, but all that really means is that it inevitably happens to someone. The main conflict of the story isn't the monkey itself, but rather how these two deeply traumatized and grief-stricken brothers let death shape and control their lives and tear them apart, instead of bringing them together and finding solace in their pain. Look, by now it's pretty obvious that the monkey is a banal representation of death. As Perkins told IndieWire, it symbolizes the immovable immutability of the fact that we all die. Or to expand on that through Diaz Digital, the monkey's not Chucky or Megan. The monkey doesn't do anything, it's just there. If you took the monkey out, you have the same problem, and that problem is called living and dying. There's no predicting it, there's no solving it. The monkey is a totem for the fact that everybody dies and there's nothing you can do about it. Sure, it's not exactly the most original theme, it's literally Final Destination with a bit of a monkey's paw twist, but what's so shockingly compelling about how the film treats the ubiquity of death is that it has this cynically hilarious deadpan fuck you attitude towards it. It constantly beats you over the head with the fact that death is absolute, and everything around it is pure chaos. Freak accidents, natural causes, cancer, aneurysms, etc, etc. When it rains, it fucking pours.
Is there a divine plan? Sure, maybe. Call it a coin toss, heads or tails.
In short, the moral of the story is the brothers realizing what their mother taught them. You can live in fear of death, or make peace with it, and accept the hand you've dealt. In fact, the most common description I've seen thrown around for this film is that it's nihilistic, and to be honest, I wanted to avoid using that word because I practically use it in almost every video because I have a very limited vocabulary, but nonetheless, it is a very appropriate description. By the end, you see, nothing really gets better, as it were, because death will forever exist. You cannot just make it go away, so it concludes with Hal echoing what his mother Lois nonchalantly told him and his brother following the untimely funeral of their babysitter. Everybody dies. Some peacefully, some horribly, but until it happens to you, let's go dancing. In Stephen King's original story, Hal is still married and has 2 sons, and while yes, he has a tense relationship with his brother, who is also married in this version, it doesn't explore any sort of rivalry between them. In fact, Bill is a very minor character in the short story. Instead, Hal's conflict is focused around his strained relationship with his sons, particularly his oldest one, Dennis, who's grown rebellious and emotionally distant. While the film does incorporate this, the difference with book Hal is that he's a bit more overbearing and overprotective in his efforts to keep his kids away from the monkey. At one point, he describes feeling helpless as a father, even touching on the parental fear of how your kids will cope after you're gone, which reflects on Hal and Bill's childhood, where their father abandoned them at such a young age that they don't even remember him, while their mother died when they were 10. You could say it brings in a sort of basilisk motif, where you can own it, even create it, but you cannot control it, which in Hal's case isn't just the monkey, but also his sons, who will one day think for themselves. Hell, the film does loosely make a similar point when young Hal asks his mother for advice for the future, and she says, "Take life as it comes, the worst thing you can do is try to force it." In other words, just accept you cannot control every variable in your life. The short story ends with Hal and his youngest son Petey submerging the monkey in a lake, with Hal acknowledging that, while it may not be a solution, he hopes it will buy them some time before it returns, reflecting the notion that death is inevitable. The film's conclusion, however, furthers that poignancy by having Hal accept ownership of the monkey, which can be taken as him accepting his own emotional baggage and a certain part of life he simply cannot control. But we'll come back to this when we get into the nitty-gritty of certain parts of the film, because we should probably address the actual monkey in the room. As I've said, the physical existence of the monkey is inconsequential. It's not about what it does, but rather what it represents. If you try to get rid of it, it'll only ever come back. As such, the story deliberately avoids ever explaining its logic or origins. In fact, in the film, there are nuggets to help theorize about it, but ultimately, and well, fittingly nihilistically, it's pointless to explain it when death doesn't operate with logic or reason to begin with. In both versions, the monkey is nothing more than a random toy manufactured in China that their father bought in a pawn shop. It's random cursed object 101. It's given a psychologically ambiguous appearance where Hal interprets the perpetual grin on the monkey's face as though it literally speaks to him, mocks him, torments him, and latches onto him like a parasite. There's even a scene in the film when young Hal chops up the monkey to discover it bleeds, which all comes back to this notion that he's channeling death into something physical so that it can be harmed, defeated, and destroyed, which of course has already proven futile for his father, because again, it's just a reminder that death is always there. The object means absolutely nothing. Technically, there's only 3 differences with the monkey in both versions. The book constantly perpetuates the bad vibes and threatening aura, whereas Perkins scrapped the original script's serious tone for a more comedic angle, given how inherently far-fetched the premise is. Design-wise, the book uses a monkey with cymbals, while the film uses a drum, but only because Perkins told SFX magazine that Disney owns the copyright for the monkey with cymbals for Toy Story. However, the big notable difference that's central to the brothers' conflict is how much control the user has over the monkey when turning its key. As far as Bill is concerned, the user is immune because winding up the monkey gives it what it wants, but Hal sees things much differently when he first uses it as a kid and indirectly causes the death of his mother when attempting to kill Bill. As Hal coldly declares, the monkey doesn't take requests, it doesn't follow orders, it is pure chaos that's true to the phrase written on the front of the box the monkey was gifted in like life, you cannot control what comes next. Anyway, when it comes to comparing the film to King's original, I'm just going to be blunt and say that the film is significantly better. I think King's version is a complete slog and probably the weakest chapter in the Skeleton Crew anthology. Thematically, they're not too dissimilar in how they focus on repressed trauma, parental influence, and, well, death, but Perkins' adaptation greatly benefits from expanding on the broader existential issues of the story. Following the untimely death of their mother Lois, Hal and Bill are fostered with their Auntie Ida and Uncle Chip, the latter of whom is played by Perkins, but after Bill winds the monkey himself, it kills Chip when he's trampled to death by 67 wild horses on a random camping trip. Upon realizing that the monkey will never stop killing those closest to them as long as it's in their possession, the brothers eventually decide to dump the monkey in a well. However, 25 years later, it inevitably returns and kills Ida after several attempts, causing Bill to reconnect with Hal after 10 years without speaking, and pressuring Hal into looking for the monkey. Yet the caveat during all of these unforeseen circumstances is that Hal is given one final week of custody with his son Petey, after his ex-wife and her new obnoxious boyfriend, played by Elijah Wood, decide to cut Hal out of their life for good. Now, let me address Elijah Wood's character for a moment because it really seems to tease him to get killed at some point, but his character never comes back into the story. There is no Chekhov's gun here. He is so blatantly set up as this smarmy douchebag, self-proclaimed alpha male expert in an area he clearly knows fuck all about, but the cruelest thing the film does is not give you the satisfaction of seeing him get his comeuppance for how he treats Hal, which is kind of brilliant if immensely frustrating. It only goes to reinforce just how unfair and unjust life ultimately is, and that you don't always get what you want. Again, the monkey doesn't take requests, and it mirrors back onto Hal's childhood, where he was regularly bullied by a group of girls whose actions are never met with consequences either.
I have your power, so...
Well, I peed in one of your bushes on the way in, so...
Now, this is the part where I suggest that we arm wrestle.
What?
To me, it's almost as if the monkey deliberately avoids going after the people you want it to because, as the old saying goes, bad things always seem to happen to good people, while bad people just seem to get away with fucking everything. Anyway, another character worth addressing who's solely unique to the film is Ricky, who's initially hired by Bill to find the monkey and buys it at a garden sale outside Ida's house, but his character ends up growing sentimental towards the monkey because it reminds him of his own father, who also abandoned him as a child. I feel his character is a weak link to an otherwise pretty tight script because he's pretty underdeveloped and spends more time on screen than you'd think he would, but I believe the idea is to suggest that the monkey is drawn to those with traumas or baggage because there's an emotional duality established between Ricky and Bill when they both literally dress in their childhood traumas. Ricky wears his father's police uniform, while Bill wears his childhood funeral suit and lives in what Ricky later describes as Bill's childhood fortress. Both characters are deeply deranged, but underneath it all, it's very tragic, especially when it comes to Bill. During his mother's funeral, Bill has a nervous breakdown and struggles to comprehend the reality of his mother's death, and thus ever since, his life has been consumed just waiting for the monkey to return to exact revenge on Hal.
Hey, Mom! Mom, wake up! Mom? Mom, that's a funny joke!
With the first half of the film focusing on Hal and Bill's childhood, the second half sees Hal arrive in town with Petey to discover that the locals have been dying in daily freak accidents, which Hal quickly learns is the result of Bill constantly turning the key, hoping that the monkey will eventually target Hal. Yet, after Bill learns of Petey's existence, since Hal never told either party about each other, Bill believes if he gets Petey to turn the key, maybe the monkey will finally kill Hal. However, at no point is there any reason to this logic. We've already bluntly accepted that the monkey operates on its own terms, so after Ricky eventually abducts Petey and Hal and takes them to Bill in the hopes of getting the monkey back for himself, naturally the only thing that is certain is that nothing goes to plan. While Petey is forced to go into Bill's fortress to get the monkey for Ricky, Bill has Petey eventually turn the key, causing an army of fucking hornets to kill Ricky, while Hal flees inside and tries to reason with Bill. After further chaos erupts around town, including newlyweds dying in a parachute accident that is foreshadowed earlier in the story, I thought that was funny, that's why I brought it up, the brothers ultimately share a touching moment and come to understand that they're equally responsible for letting their pain and burdens cloud their judgment, and instead they should make the most of the time they have together, because what comes next is forever and always outside their control. Bill finally comes to his senses and agrees, and decides to go with Hal and Petey on a family road trip so that they can share a positive experience together. But fuck you, the monkey kills Bill, ironically with his mother's own bowling ball. The film ends by consolidating its themes with what's basically an isolated apocalypse, where Bill's actions have caused a chain reaction of chaos, and in order to contain that chaos, Hal finally accepts ownership of the monkey, and echoing his mother's life advice, decides to go dancing with Petey. Oh, and just a cheeky wee cherry on top, we even see the pale horse of death that is referenced by both brothers on separate occasions pass by, literally burnt out from overseeing the death around him as life simply goes on.